So tell me, how the hell is it 2016 already?
I see it, and now it's all within my reach. Possibility. I see it now. It's always been inside of me. And now I feel so free. And there's possibility. And there's possibility. And there's possibility. And there's possibility. And there's possibility.
I'd say 2015 was a pretty awesome year for me. Sure, it had a lot of ups and downs here and there, but as a gamer especially, this last year was very special. And hey, this year was pretty great for gaming as well, so here we go. You probably know the rules by now, and frankly, no one wants to hear me sound like a broken record, so... So in 2014, I played this funny little game by the name of Fire Emblem Awakening. Perhaps you've heard of it? Yeah, this was the game pretty much everyone and their mother was flipping their shit over in 2013 and 2014. And while I don't like it as much as some people, I'm still very glad I played it. Because thanks to this game, I never could have gotten into Blazing Sword. Thanks to Awakening, I was actually encouraged to try out the other games in the Fire Emblem series, and I decided to have a go on the first FE game released in the West. While I don't enjoy Blazing Sword nearly as much as Awakening, I was surprised on how much I still end up enjoying it. For one, Blazing Sword's battle system is very solid and just as satisfying as Awakening's. Using the weapon triangle to your advantage is even a bigger asset this time, and managing your units is the key to victory, much like in any strategy RPG. But the thing that surprised me the most were the characters. While again not as good as Awakening's cast, Blazing Sword has tons of very likable characters. And while we don't get much insight on them thanks to the support system not being as advanced as in Awakening, most of them get a good coverage during the miscellaneous conversations as well as the main story. The three main lords in particular, Lyn, Eliwood and Hector, are some of the best the game has to offer. Of course, the game isn't without its problems, like the bullshit random number generator or some really irritating difficulty spikes, but overall this game is very much worth your time. And I can't wait to see what else the series has in store for me. Now if only I could get my hands on Ike's games. My path into the Metal Gear series has been a rocky one. My first MGS game was the very first one, which took me about 2 years to beat. But I ventured on, and last year, after finally beating the first game, I moved on to MGS2. And while I do like it more than the first one, I haven't really played it enough to put it on the list.
But in that case, it's a good thing I've been rising. With a Revengeance.
Okay, controlling a badass mercenary soldier in a stealth game is fine and all, but a cyborg ninja in a hack and slash cutting things to pieces with an electric sword? Well, shit. Metal Gear Rising is something I'm pretty sure none of us ever knew wanting from Metal Gear. But now that it's here, we love it with every neuron in our fucking body. The main appeal of Metal Gear Rising, well, aside from the memes, is the solid and action-packed hack-and-slash gameplay. Raiden here has a lot of skills in his disposal, and when you go through the game you can even upgrade them, get new skills, and even new weapons from the bosses you've beaten. In addition to its responsive tight controls, you also have access to the amazingness that is the Blade mode, which slows down time and allows you to cut everything 6 ways from Sunday. The game also had a story, I think, and the presentation is fantastic, with the graphics looking very pleasing to the eye, and the overall soundtrack being easily the best in the Metal Gear series. Of course, it's not all great, the game's pretty short, and those fucking gorillas as well as the monsoon fight can go fuck themselves, but overall it's a very fun and engrossing ride. You've done it again, Platinum Games, you beautiful bastards! Aside from getting me more into the Fire Emblem series, Awakening also encouraged me to try out other strategy RPGs. So last summer, because Steam sales equals the death of wallets, I decided to give a try to a game I had heard a lot of good things about. For those who don't know, Valkyria Chronicles is a strategy RPG made by Sega. The story takes place in a fictional version of Europe named Europa. The game follows the events of this world's representation of World War II, where a country named Gallia is trying to defend itself from a huge empire attempting to take over their lands. And the game's main protagonist, Welkin, who happens to be a Gallian, gets mixed up in the battle with the Empire after his hometown is pretty much destroyed, after which he ends up joining the army and helping to stop the Imperial Stampede. From the gameplay standpoint, the game is pretty unique for an RPG. Instead of your typical swords and axes, your units wield a variety of different military weapons, ranging from a normal rifle to a machine gun and an anti-tank lance. Don't ask. The combat of the game, though, works pretty similarly to other strategy RPGs. You and the enemy move units during your respective turns, and you can engage in combat by targeting an enemy unit with your weapon. The amount of damage you do depends on your class, your distance from the enemy, and even the terrain. I feel that this gameplay style works really well for a game about warfare, as it makes you really feel like a commander on the battlefield, doing the necessary decisions to win the battle. And lastly, I really like this game's characters, the main characters in particular being a very enjoyable bunch. I also love how each of the units' personality traits trace back to their performance in battle, like performing better with someone they like near them. I haven't been in the game yet, and I'm pretty far from it probably, but from what I've played so far, I can't wait to see what else the Gallian forces have in store for me. You know, there are some series and games out there that I honestly never thought I would really get into. Like the entire RPG genre, but that was way back when. So let's talk about Hyperdimension Neptunia. I first heard about this series through a certain trivia enthusiast and decided to check out the anime based on it from a friend's recommendation. And while I liked it and wanted to try out the games, I never thought I'd end up liking the first game this much. The thing that really surprised me with the game was its battle system. Instead of the typical turn-based stuff, you move freely around the battlefield and target the enemy to attack them with different combos. And depending on your position and equipped weapon, you might be able to attack more than just one enemy. The combat feels very satisfying, and wailing down combos on your opponents almost never feels repetitive, since you can always change up your attacks. The presentation is also fantastic. The game looks absolutely amazing, from the graphical quality to the characters' portraits. The sound is top notch as well, with a really catchy soundtrack and some superb voice acting. I also really like most of the environments in the game, as they are a great clash between natural, industrial, and technical areas. But easily my favorite part of the game are its writing and the interactions between the characters. As the game's characters are based on video game companies, the writing makes an excellent job of making this apparent. And even without that, all of the characters play up to their respective personalities, creating a lot of hilarity and pretty genius moments. At the time of writing this, I'm only about 10 hours into the game, but I think I can already say that I've found a new all-time favorite. Can't wait to get into the second game.
And no, let me stop you there. That is not the main reason why. Nokamba is still best wife.
Prior to last year, my experience with the Metroid series was pretty minimal. Before 2014, I had only played a grand total of 2 Metroid games, both of which I played very little of. In 2014, however, I got my hands on Metroid Prime 3 for the Wii and loved it. And thanks to Nintendo releasing the Prime trilogy in the Wii U eShop, I could finally see what the rest of the trilogy had to offer. Like with Hyperdimension Neptunia, I might have only played a few hours of Metroid Prime, but the time I put into it certainly tells me about quality. The game's main appeal comes from the fact that you're given pretty much free hands on how to explore the planet of Talon 4. Not to mention, the 4 areas you venture on are all well structured and fun to explore. At least most of the time. What I also like about Metroid Prime is its ability to drive the game forward without an intricate plot. Rather, it's the gameplay and the players want to explore that make the game's events flow. Of course, the game has some sort of story, but instead of outright telling you what's happening, you have to learn the story by using the scan function and learn the story at your own pace. And while I'm not the biggest fan of that myself, it's an interesting idea nonetheless. The game isn't exactly perfect, some parts are very tedious, and I'm definitely not looking forward to hunting the Chozo artifacts later on, but they can't take me away from the overall experience. And I can't wait to see what greatness Metroid Prime 2 will have on the table. Here's to a new all-time favorites. You're a kid now, you're something. Fuck, I can't meme. Never thought this would become as much of a hit that it has. There's something truly wonderful about Splatoon. What originally looked like a quirky idea has suddenly become pretty much Nintendo's next big hit. Not that I'm complaining, the game's actually pretty good. Splatoon is something that's probably born when you mix together paintball and TF2. The game is an online shooter where you compete in teams of 4, but instead of racking up your kills, the main objective in every battle is to cover the battlefield with your own team's ink as much as you can, and the points you get are determined by how much area you got covered. Covering the area in your ink also allows you to travel faster in squid form. Oh yeah! Squid! That's the word I was looking for! Not to mention, the game has a variety of different main, sub, and special weapons, which all mostly have their own strengths and weaknesses, keeping the game balanced. Or that's what I would say if this thing wouldn't exist. In addition, the game also has a ton of different equipment that affect your performance in battle. And even if you grow tired of the online multiplayer, you can always try out the single player campaign, which is also pretty great. Especially the bosses. So overall, it's not hard to see why Splatoon has become such a big hit. And while I prefer other online shooters like TF2, Splatoon is definitely a lot of fun. Can't wait to see what kind of hit Nintendo has for us in 2016. You know, before 2015, I wasn't too big on the indie scene. Most indie games didn't look all that interesting to me, and I didn't really have many chances to try them out. But last year, I finally broke the ice and played 2 indie games in particular that I ended up loving very much. And for the first one, I can dig it. Boy am I late to party for this one! Shovel Knight was easily the indie success of 2014, and for a lot of people, it has already cemented itself as a modern classic because that's what it is. Shovel Knight is a game that brings together elements from classic platformers of the NES to the modern era. The game is a 2D platformer that takes elements from various NES games all the way down to the ball-busting difficulty. The level design is what this game lives for, and frankly, most of the levels in the game work in the way they were intended. In other words, they work perfectly for making me cry from frustration. Well, at least the game plays great. I also love the attention to detail in Shovel Knight. You can clearly see how much effort Yacht Club Games put into this one package. And the presentation also speaks for this. The look of the game is a perfect clash between modern and classic, and the music is oh so much 16-bit goodness. So yeah, Shovel Knight definitely deserves the praise it has gotten. And even though I don't rate it as high as some people, it was still an amazing experience. As seen earlier with Shovel Knight, I played quite a bit of 2D platformers this past year. While platformers are my favorite genre in gaming, I've never been too invested in the 2D side. Don't get me wrong, I still like them a lot, but I missed out on many franchises that were solely built on 2D platforming. Good thing last year I was able to expand my horizons with one of the most beloved 2D platformer franchises. I've never been too big on the Donkey Kong franchise, but for some reason, the moment I first saw Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze in action, I knew I had to get my hands on it. The game works like your typical 2D platformer. You jump on enemies and platforms and collect all kinds of shit. You can also pound the ground and roll to go faster or to attack your enemies, as well as use various partners you get from barrels. Diddy Kong allows you to hover, Dixie Kong gives you a double jump, and Cranky Kong is Scrooge McDuck. I especially love most of the levels' designs. The aesthetic side is very well done in almost every level, and the levels themselves are mostly very challenging, especially the secret temple levels, which can make me cry. The game's presentation is also complemented by the game's amazing soundtrack, which not only sounds great on its own, but also fits into their respective level well. So overall, I'm very glad I got to try out Tropical Freeze. It has its fair share of problems, which I won't mention because I would just end up complaining about the game's difficulty, but Tropical Freeze is still a solid and very expanding package.
Oh yeah, I can meme.
Even though I'm a big fan of Crash Bandicoot and Jak and Daxter, it took me quite a while to get into Naughty Dog's newer franchises. I mean, I still haven't played The Last of Us, and I played the first Uncharted game just in 2014. And honestly, while I liked Drake's Fortune, I will admit that it had some very noticeable flaws that dragged the game down. Then the sequel came along and fixed everything. After the first game's rather lackluster performance, I honestly didn't think Uncharted 2 would be this good. The gameplay segments with both the climbing and platforming, as well as gunning down your enemies, are now a lot more tighter and overall just more fun. Plus, the enemies don't have as much of a perfect aim like in the first one, where it made me want to rip my eyes, hair, and whatever body part you can rip out of your face. And with stealth elements also added, you don't always have to fight. I also like the story a lot more than in Uncharted 1. Sure, it's pretty much the same stuff with Nate going around looking for treasure and then finding out something horrendous about the said treasure near the end, but this time I felt a lot more invested in the story more than with the first game. Even though the new characters introduced weren't the best in the world, and Harry Flynn can go fuck a goat. Finally, I also love the variety of environments in the game. In the first game it was mostly just jungle and its temples, but Uncharted 2 has a snowy mountain, a Turkish museum, an Arabic city, and even a freaking train! This variety certainly helps the game's overall quality, as does everything else I've mentioned. Thanks to Uncharted 2, I can now safely say that I am a fan of the series, and I can't wait to get my hands on Uncharted 3. And the fourth game whenever I get a PS4. About fucking time I got to play this game. After this game had a fan translation and I heard it was really good, I wanted to try out the game for myself. But at the time of its release, I couldn't because patches are stupid, but last year I was finally able to get the ROM working. And boy was it worth. It's worth! The second investigation, titled Prosecutor's Path, is not only much better than its predecessor, but also one of the best games in the Ace Attorney series. Let's list the reasons why. Like the first game, the events take place during a span of a few days, each case having 2 or 3 days separating them. But this time around, the story is actually much more engaging than the first game, not only because it ties everything together much better, but also directly involves Miles into the story, which in turn results in that lovely sweet thing known as character development. A lot of the gameplay elements are pretty much the same as the first Investigations, but there's one thing that makes this game more enjoyable to play than the first: logic chess. Seriously, if Cyclops weren't so great already, this would definitely be my favorite special gameplay element in the series. Bringing down your opponents by using sheer logic? Oh, so satisfying. Lastly, the game's presentation is excellent, with beautiful sprite work and a soundtrack that lives up to Ace Attorney standards. I also have to give kudos to the group that made the fan translation, because the game is written in such a way that you couldn't tell is it official or not. And of course, without you, we never could have played this masterpiece.
You thought it was a bad idea to localize this game, Capcom.
I was first introduced to the Persona series by a friend's recommendation. I had heard a lot of good things about the series prior, and since Persona 4 had a lot of my favorite voice actors, I decided to check out P4 the animation and fell in love with it. However, at the time of writing this, I have no way of actually playing Persona 4 because the PS2 version is hard to find, I don't have a PS Vita, and Atlas hates Europe. So in the meantime, might as well go for the next best thing. You know, at first I was quite hesitant to try out Persona 3, mainly because I thought it was gonna be nothing like Persona 4. But in the summer of last year, I decided to buy the game anyway, and no regrets were made that day. The story is actually very different from Persona 4, the only real similarity being that you're a transfer student, things happen, and you have to fight shadows. But in Persona 3, there's a hidden hour during midnight called the Dark Hour when the shadows appear, and the main characters are trying to eliminate it. And that's the story in a nutshell, because I really want to keep away from those pesky spoilers. The gameplay is a cross between a standard turn-based RPG where you use your character during battle and exploit enemy weaknesses to take them down, and life simulation where you build up your relationship with other characters. I enjoy both sides of the gameplay, though they both have flaws like why can I only control the main character and why the fuck is it a game over when he dies? Finally, my favorite part about this game are its music and characters. The soundtrack is absolutely amazing, having some of the catchiest and weirdest video game tracks I've heard in my life, and the cast of characters is just as good as Persona 4's. I mean, it has Yukari and Akihiko, so that's automatically A+ on the character department. I think that's all that needs to be said. Persona games are great, so go play them. So remember when I said that there were 2 indie games I fell in love with? Yeah, you can see where this is going. So, Dust and Elysian Tale. Ever wanted a Metroidvania-style 2D platformer with hack-and-slash combat and RPG elements which is also full of furries? Well, your wish is granted because this game fits exactly into that description. On the outset, Dust might seem like a shallow indie title with no real depth to it, but you'd be a fool to think that if you haven't tried out the game for yourself. The combat of the game, for one, is very satisfying. Pulling off combos with your sword is a real spectacle, especially when you have the access to the Dust Storm, which allows you to spin your sword rapidly to damage enemies and control the power of the winds. Add in Aerial Dust Storm and your partner's projectiles and watch the destruction unfold on the screen. I also have to give it to the game's amazing presentation. The art style of the game is not only very pleasing to the eye, but a lot of the environments are just downright breathtaking. And the soundtrack just adds to that, being completely orchestral and, much like the visuals, leaves you very breathless. Add in a great story about an amnesia done right with a message of discrimination and finding one's place in the world, as well as some well-written and memorable characters, and you've got what currently stands as my favorite indie game. And since I hear there are plans for a sequel, I can't wait to see where Dean Dottrell will take this amazing masterpiece. Smash Brothers! Can you say late to the party?
Well, to be fair, this was the first game I played last year, but whatever, it's Smash Bros. And it's awesome.
Even though I'm pretty sure I don't have to explain a whole lot why this game is so high, let alone on this list, let's just go over some stuff because I don't want to look lazy. As someone who played both the 3DS and Wii U version, I can say with some confidence that Super Smash Bros. 4 is easily the strongest game in the series. Battle mechanics are better than ever before, and all the stuff that annoyed the living crap out of people in Brawl is now gone, replaced with new, better stuff. The new modes are also a lot of fun, mostly. Modes like Smash Run and Special Orders are definitely a welcome addition to the series, and there's also Smash Tour. And modes like Classic and All-Star have been made even better.
Okay, Classic Mode was filled with a lot of randomness, but I still enjoyed it for what it was.
And lastly, the character roster. Even though I was kinda disappointed with it at first, looking at it now, I'd say this is overall the best roster in any Smash game. We got a lot of great newcomers, not to mention characters we never thought were gonna be in Smash Brothers. Cloud Strife? What the fuck? I think I don't need to say much else. This is one of the most hyped games of the current decade, and I'm proud to say that it most certainly lived up to most of my expectations. You know, until 2014, this next series I'm going to talk about was actually a series I kinda hated. But in 2014, I managed to play the first game in the series and started to change my outlook completely. And thanks to these two games, I can say that the days when I hated this series are mostly over. Kingdom Hearts 2 and Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep. Final mix. Yeah, I'm doing a tie in the top 3 again, and even though KH2 is my favorite, can't leave Birth by Sleep unmentioned. And they're pretty much neck to neck for being my favorite games in the series anyways. So what exactly makes these games so good for me? Well, first of all, these games are fun. The combat in both games combines hack and slash and RPG elements, and it works like a toasted jam on sandwich. Wait, what? The gameplay is made even better by flashy special moves like the forms and the reaction commands in the second game, and the command styles in Birth by Sleep, and they all transition to normal gameplay perfectly without having to go too much out of your way to use them. The presentation is also fantastic. It might be the HD remix talking, but both games look gorgeous, and especially the more colorful worlds are a real eye candy. The same goes for the soundtrack, it's amazing. If there ever was a genius on board with the KH games, then Yoko Shimomura would be my vote. My favorites include 13 Struggle, Dilemma and Reflection, Fate of the Unknown, the themes of Aqua, Terra and Ventus, Enter the Darkness, Black Power and Rage Awakened, which you're hearing right now. As for the story, it's kinda lackluster in KH2, but the story in Birth by Sleep is really great, showing people how to make a good prequel, and even KH2, for its questionable shit, has its fair share of amazing and memorable moments. What can I say? These games have pretty much climbed up my favorite games list like it's nothing. And while they're still nowhere near the top, I'm proud to say that I still love them. Now, time for honorable mentions! So remember what I said about playing a lot of 2D platformers? Well, here's my new favorite! Like Metroid, my experience with the Kirby series has been very limited. It's not that I never wanted to play Kirby, I just couldn't. But in 2014, I got to try Triple Deluxe and loved it. And thanks to Nintendo bringing it to the Wii U eShop, I finally got a chance to try out the quintessential Kirby game, Return to Dreamland. And guess what happened? Well, it just became my favorite 2D platformer. It was a rhetorical question, you dumb fuck. So anyway, let's talk about this amazing game. And honestly, I loved all of Return to Dreamland's gameplay equally. The level design, the copy abilities, and the co-op, everything just felt right to me. And usually I suck at 2D platformers, and granted, there were some moments of suck with this one as well, but it wasn't so strong as with, say, Shovel Knight or Donkey Kong Country. And also, the super abilities are fucking amazing, just throwing that out there. The presentation is also great, one of the best looking games on the Wii with a beautiful soundtrack to boot. And well, the story is your average platformer stuff, but there's actually a quite surprising twist at the end of the game.
Which I knew about before playing the game. Fuck!
But really, I can't just pinpoint the reason why I loved Return to Dreamland so much. Throughout playing the game, I was just really feeling it. It's that special kind of game that I crave going back to even after finishing it just a little while ago. But unfortunately, my backlog is as big as Kirby's Hammer Space, so that will have to wait. In the meantime, I shall keep it as one of my new favorite games of all time.
I'm finished up, and take it away, Kirby! Makes me happy.
In the future we'll decide if there's a hero buried deep inside. I wanna be a hero. Pokemon!
Noir? Fancy name. I bet you don't have any friends and stuff.